stop scrolling. A murder case just turned into a credibility massacre. Suge Knight just threw a live grenade into the Tupac murder trial, and courtroom tension just jumped from serious to radioactive. Suge Knight did not whisper. Suge Knight did not soften a single edge. Suge Knight looked straight at a key witness lane and basically said, fraud, fiction, fairy tale. James McDonald stepped into testimony with a story. Suge Knight stepped into public conversation with a flamethrower. According to Suge Knight, James McDonald never worked real security for death row, never moved like inner circle muscle, never wore the chain, never wore the ring, never showed up in pictures, never carried the visible stamp that came with real proximity. Right there, the case changed shape. Not because one statement proves innocence. Not because one rant rewrites history. Because one loud denial from a name attached to the original orbit forces a brutal question. What happens when a murder trial starts bleeding credibility from inside the witness box? That question hits harder because Keffe D already built a public brand out of confession theater. Podcast after podcast. Interview after interview. Chapter after chapter. A full parade of detail, memory, swagger, and self-mythology. Keffe D spent years turning proximity to Tupac's death into currency. Keffe D acted like memory came easy. Keffe D acted like chronology came easy. Keffe D acted like names, motives, cars, money, and movement all sat in perfect order inside Keffe D's head. Now the courtroom arrived. Now prison time sits on the table. Now not guilty language entered the chat. Now old confidence suddenly feels allergic to hard consequence. That shift alone deserves a long stare. Because public audiences watched Keffe D volunteer story after story for attention, notoriety, relevance, and cash value. Public audiences watched Keffe D talk with the comfort of a man who believed distance from punishment would last forever. Public audiences watched Keffe D sell aura from a night that never stopped haunting hip-hop. Then reality finally sent a bill. And reality does not accept podcast energy as legal defense. Reality wants evidence. Reality wants consistency. Reality wants witnesses with clean foundations. Reality wants stories that survive cross-examination instead of thriving inside studio lighting. Suge Knight just attacked one of those foundations. Suge Knight's message was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. If James McDonald really belonged around death row like testimony suggests, proof should exist. Pictures should exist. Jewelry should exist. Recognition should exist. A paper trail should exist. Street memory should exist. Something solid should exist. According to Suge Knight, none of that exists. According to Suge Knight, James McDonald sounds less like a trusted insider and more like a man wearing borrowed mythology. And once borrowed mythology touches a murder trial, every juror-sized question grows teeth. Because a courtroom can survive messy personalities. A courtroom can survive ugly history. A courtroom can survive old beef, contradictory egos, and media circus noise. A courtroom cannot survive easy doubt around core voices without paying a price. Every weak link turns reasonable doubt into a muscle car. Every credibility crack becomes a highway. Every inconsistency becomes oxygen for defense strategy. Keffe D's defense does not need sainthood. Keffe D's defense needs fractures. Suge Knight just offered one. And maybe a massive one. Now pause on the darkest irony sitting in plain sight. Tupac's death remained one of culture's most painful unfinished chapters for decades. Public frustration built year after year because so many names floated around the case, so many theories refused to die, and so many powerful figures seemed to float above consequence. Every fresh rumor created another circle. Every new interview created another shadow. Every old feud created another branch. Justice always looked close enough to feel, yet far enough to dodge capture. Then came the strangest twist of all. A man tied to decades of street whispers started talking like retirement age erased legal danger. Keffe D gave culture a stream of statements that sounded almost impossible to fake at scale. Because performance works until performance meets prosecution. Then every sentence becomes a possible blade. Then every boast becomes an exhibit candidate. Then every attempt at legacy building starts looking like self-authored damage. Now layer Suge Knight's explosion over that backdrop. Suge Knight is not a random internet voice fishing for clicks. Suge Knight is a loaded source. A controversial source. A compromised source in many eyes. Yet Suge Knight remains a source with direct historical gravity around death row, Tupac, and the ecosystem surrounding that fatal Las Vegas night. So when Suge Knight says James McDonald is fake, public audiences cannot shrug and move on. Public audiences immediately start recalculating the board. Was James McDonald overstating access? Was James McDonald shaped into a cleaner witness than reality allows? Was James McDonald carrying second-hand stories dressed up as first-row truth? Was James McDonald useful because James McDonald sounded plausible on camera? Was James McDonald useful because jurors respond to confidence even when confidence sits on air? Every one of those questions matters. Every one of those questions poisons certainty. And certainty already looked shaky because another witness reportedly told police that Tupac knew the shooter yet refused to name names. That detail sounds dramatic. That detail also opens another hole. If Tupac identified the shooter privately and refused to cooperate publicly, prosecutors gain atmosphere but not closure. Atmosphere can stir headlines. Atmosphere can electrify commentary. Atmosphere cannot magically close evidentiary gaps. A murder trial built around a famous ghost needs more than fog. A murder trial built around Tupac needs steel. Public audiences waited almost 30 years for steel. Public audiences do not want a half-built bridge made from old interviews, damaged memory, shaky testimony, and celebrity gravity. Public audiences want a chain strong enough to drag truth into daylight. And right now that chain looks like a mix of rust, ego, missing links, and conflicting narrators. Now enter the shadow name that keeps stalking the edges of every conversation. Diddy. No courtroom caption in current trial footage needs to scream Diddy for Diddy's presence to hover over every hot take, every live stream, every family debate, and every barbershop autopsy. Diddy's name lives in public suspicion because Diddy has spent years inside theories about motive, money, and orchestration tied to the East Coast-West Coast War. Public memory never stopped circling Diddy. Public anger never stopped circling Diddy. Public imagination built an entire storm system around Diddy. That storm system matters even when legal filings stay narrower. Because culture is watching two trials at once. One trial sits in Nevada. Another trial sits in public consciousness. Nevada is asking whether Keffe D can be convicted. Public consciousness is asking whether a bigger machine stayed untouched for decades. Nevada is asking for proof. Public consciousness is asking why so many powerful names always seem to remain one room away from consequence. That split explains the heat. That split explains the obsession. That split explains why every new witness, every contradiction, every old clip, and every off-camera accusation detonates so hard. Keffe D may be the defendant on paper. Keffe D is not the only name under emotional prosecution. Diddy sits inside the audience's invisible indictment. Suge Knight just poured more fuel on that invisible indictment by attacking credibility around one visible witness. Because once a witness looks questionable, public audiences do not merely doubt one man. Public audiences start doubting the architecture. And once architecture looks unstable, every blocked-off hallway suddenly feels deliberate. That is where a viral angle really lives. Not inside simple guilt talk. Not inside recycled conspiracy wallpaper. The official story may be fighting for life almost as hard as the defendant. That angle changes everything. Because public audiences can handle a villain. Public audiences know how to process monsters, greed, ego, violence, and betrayal. Public audiences get lost when the map itself starts lying. A lying witness is one scandal. A fragile narrative spine is a bigger scandal. A courtroom where testimony feels shaky, memory feels selective, and public trust feels exhausted becomes more than a murder trial. That courtroom becomes a referendum on whether celebrity crime stories ever reach full truth once money, fear, reputation, and power enter the bloodstream. And look at the timing. Because prosecutors need coherence. Defense needs confusion. Suge Knight just donated confusion. Not a little confusion. Deluxe confusion. Weaponized confusion. Confusion with a famous signature attached. One side says Keffe D talked too much and authored doom. Another side says Keffe D performed for fame and prosecutors grabbed smoke instead of fire. Another side says bigger names still walk free while a smaller name absorbs the whole burden. Another side says no version of justice can feel complete while Diddy remains a permanent rumor cloud instead of a fully tested legal target. And every side is feeding on the same reality. A legendary murder never received a clean, universally satisfying truth. That vacuum created an industry. Tupac's death became both tragedy and marketplace. Keffe D sold pieces of that marketplace. Now a courtroom is trying to decide whether marketplace talk was confession, fiction, self-preservation, or some toxic cocktail blending all three. Suge Knight's challenge to James McDonald lands so hard because marketplace culture thrives on blurry borders between insider truth and insider cosplay. One chain missing matters. One photo missing matters. One fake credential matters. Because once a witness starts sounding like brand management, jurors may hear performance instead of proof. And performance is already everywhere. Look at the broader pattern. Keffe D allegedly talked like a man collecting attention points. Public commentators talk like amateur prosecutors. Old associates talk like score settlers. Fans talk like archivists. Critics talk like behavior profilers. Everybody sounds certain until one contradiction enters and scrambles certainty into static. Suge Knight just delivered static at maximum volume. Now, imagine the defense room after that clip landed. Defense attorneys do not need a miracle from Suge Knight. Defense attorneys need angles. Defense attorneys need tools to ask jurors whether memory can be manipulated, whether fame contaminates recollection, whether opportunists attach identities to famous cases, whether law enforcement built too much around colorful talkers and not enough around ironclad material proof. James McDonald, according to Suge Knight, may now serve as a launchpad for exactly that line of attack. And once defense opens that door, prosecutors must do more than object. Prosecutors must restore trust. Prosecutors must show jurors why testimony belongs inside belief and not inside entertainment. That is a brutal job in any case. That job becomes terrifying in a case carrying 30 years of baggage. Because nostalgia distorts. Because resentment distorts. Because unsolved legend distorts. Because every person still alive from that era carries scars, agendas, loyalties, grudges, or survival instincts. Clean truth rarely grows from poisoned soil. Still, culture keeps demanding harvest. Another piece of emotional voltage comes from Suge Knight's own role in public imagination. Suge Knight is not treated like an ordinary commentator. Suge Knight enters any Tupac discussion like a siren. Past reputation guarantees attention. Past darkness guarantees suspicion. Past proximity guarantees impact. Even audiences who distrust Suge Knight still listen because Suge Knight sounds like a man standing near the blast radius when history exploded. That paradox is part of the magnet. A compromised source can still change a case climate. A compromised source can still wake up sleeping doubt. A compromised source can still remind public audiences that official narratives are not the only narratives fighting for oxygen. And every time oxygen shifts, pressure changes. Keffe D knows pressure now in a form Keffe D never knew during all those microphones and memoir moments. Internet heat is one thing. Courtroom heat is another species. Internet heat burns attention. Courtroom heat can burn decades off a life. That difference is why old swagger now looks expensive. Very expensive. One more point deserves a spotlight. A lot of public frustration is not only about Tupac. A lot of public frustration is about pattern recognition. Too many famous cases feel like ladders with missing rungs. The shooter gets named late. The money gets blurred. The planners stay rumored. The enablers stay faceless. The story freezes before reaching the top floor. Public audiences are tired of bottom-tier accountability in top-tier scandals. Public audiences are tired of hearing that history is complicated whenever power circles a crime scene. Public audiences are tired of invisible walls protecting names with money, connections, or institutional usefulness. That emotional backdrop is why Diddy's name keeps returning. Not because a courtroom has already sealed anything against Diddy in connection with Tupac's murder within current proceedings. Because cultural logic says larger engines usually sit behind iconic disasters. Because public audiences have watched too many systems protect powerful interests. Because Diddy symbolizes the unresolved ceiling above Keffe D. Whether fair or unfair, that symbolism is real. And viral storytelling lives where emotion meets unresolved structure. So the strongest frame is not merely, did Keffe D do enough to go down? The strongest frame is, why does every road toward final Tupac truth start shaking right when accountability gets close enough to touch? Suge Knight's attack on James McDonald plugs straight into that frame. One witness challenged. One trial destabilized. One public nerve touched. One old suspicion revived. One larger phantom reawakened. That is not ordinary update material. That is narrative jet fuel. And narrative jet fuel needs discipline. No lazy conspiracy slideshow. No recycled social media shouting. No bargain bin outrage. A smart script follows the pressure points. Point 1. Keffe D talked too much for too long. Point 2. Trial pressure changed the energy. Point 3. Suge Knight just attacked witness credibility at the exact moment credibility matters most. Point 4. A weak witness does not merely weaken one testimony line. A weak witness threatens the story structure holding public faith together. Point 5. Diddy remains the ghost name haunting every gap, every motive discussion, and every unfinished sentence around Tupac justice. Put all 5 together and the result is bigger than headline drama. The result is a courtroom saga where guilt, ego, fame, memory, power, and myth are wrestling under fluorescent light while the world watches for one thing only. A truth strong enough to survive contact with celebrity. Right now, truth still looks bruised. Public faith still looks bruised. Justice still looks conditional. And conditional justice never satisfies a wound as large as Tupac. That frustration is exactly why reaction keeps exploding online. Not every case becomes a cultural weather system. Tupac's case does. Every witness statement changes air pressure. Every old clip changes temperature. Every famous name changes wind direction. Suge Knight just triggered a storm warning. Now the central emotional question lands harder than ever. If James McDonald falls apart, what else falls apart next? If Keffe D's old words start sounding more theatrical than truthful, what remains? If prosecutors cannot turn decades of noise into a clean line of conviction, what lesson does culture take away? If Diddy never enters legal focus around public suspicion tied to wider theories, does public anger ever cool? And maybe the coldest question of all. Did fame itself help bury full truth for almost 30 years? Fame attracts microphones. Fame attracts opportunists. Fame attracts curated memories. Fame attracts strategic silence. Fame attracts men who turn history into branding. Tupac deserved better than branding. Tupac deserved better than delayed fragments. Tupac deserved better than witnesses fighting over legitimacy, while the public still struggles to locate a version of events sturdy enough to trust. Yet here the case stands. Keffe D on trial. Suge Knight throwing bombs. James McDonald under a giant credibility cloud. Diddy haunting the margins of every heated conversation. And a whole generation staring at the screen asking whether justice is finally arriving or just putting on makeup for another performance. That uncertainty is the real hook. Not simple guilt. Not simple innocence. Uncertainty with names. Uncertainty with stakes. Uncertainty with blood memory attached. Uncertainty so loud that one quote from Suge Knight can bend the direction of national conversation for hours. Maybe days. Maybe longer if cross-examination exposes more cracks. And once cracks start spreading, no amount of old confidence from Keffe D can caulk the walls shut. Keffe D may have talked a long road into existence. Suge Knight may have just made that road collapse under witness weight. Now every eye turns toward prosecutors. Can prosecutors clean the narrative? Can prosecutors isolate fantasy from fact? Can prosecutors separate podcast mythology from admissible truth? Can prosecutors survive the obvious defense pitch that fame contaminated every layer of memory? Can prosecutors deliver something stronger than emotional satisfaction? Because emotional satisfaction is not a verdict. A verdict needs bones. A verdict needs muscle. A verdict needs witnesses who do not wobble the moment a powerful old name says fraud. And until that standard gets met, public hunger will stay feral. Public hunger will keep reaching for Diddy. Public hunger will keep replaying Keffe D clips. Public hunger will keep measuring every statement from Suge Knight for hidden meaning. Public hunger will keep asking why justice in celebrity murder cases always seems one level short of complete. That hunger is not going away. Not after decades. Not after all the theories. Not after all the grief wrapped around Tupac's name. Not after one of the most iconic murders in music history turned into a maze filled with ghosts, money trails, ego trips, and vanishing certainty. So mark the real headline. Suge Knight did more than call James McDonald a liar. Suge Knight attacked the legitimacy of a pillar. And once a pillar gets attacked in a case like this, the entire temple starts making noise. Keffe D is not merely fighting charges now. The prosecution is fighting corrosion. Public trust is fighting exhaustion. Tupac's memory is fighting another round of distortion. And Diddy's shadow is fighting nothing at all because shadows do not sweat unless light gets strong enough. Maybe light is coming. Maybe more confusion is coming. Maybe both are arriving together. Either way, one fact stands taller after Suge Knight's outburst. The Tupac murder trial is no longer only about what happened in Las Vegas. The Tupac murder trial is now also about which voices deserve belief after 3 decades of smoke. That second fight may decide the first. And that second fight just got vicious. Comment section stays open. Subscribe button stays close. Smoke ahead.